These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6th, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right-to-carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was, for him, illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there, selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest. But not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to do battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, backed them, the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, "a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level," end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation. When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing. This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those of the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. "Where's the NRA?" asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. "Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too?" David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, "Two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans." Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson, we saw the old Jim Crow whites only.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Today, we've got a huge show. In the third hour, I'm going to fill you in on which state has just passed, has passed their state senate a law saying that, you can no longer teach that the Ku Klux Klan was morally wrong. Yeah, you heard that right. No, I'm not making it up. And also the influence of the digital gatekeepers on politics. We're going to be getting into that with Public Citizen in the third hour. In our second hour, can America go from being an empire to being a good neighbor? My op-ed today, we'll talk about that, and our crazy alert about Jeff Bezos' rocket, and for that matter, the Amazon logo. And Julio Rivera is going to drop by in our second hour. We will be discussing vaccine passports. That should be fascinating. But now, for our first hour, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. He's a member and former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He is on the Appropriations, Education, and Labor Committees in the U.S. House. Pocan.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. He will be with us for the hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925. Congressman Pocan, welcome back. What's at the top of the pile that you're dealing with today?
I'll tell you, I think our perennial pile is trying to get this infrastructure and reconciliation bill done, hoping that if the bipartisan group that came up with the compromise on infrastructure can actually get bipartisan votes, which is a big question at this point. And then, Bernie Sanders did an amazing job in negotiating a strong reconciliation bill. Obviously there's always a few tweaks everyone would like, but it's a really strong bill, including expanding Medicare benefits around dental, vision, and hearing. I think it's a huge win. There's some really great stuff, but we got to get them across the finish line in the Senate. Other than that, billionaires in space. The Bucks winning in Wisconsin is big, and then we're just also in the middle of our appropriation process. So lots going on.
Yeah. My sense of this so-called bipartisan bill is that this is just Lucy in the football. I mean, they did this to Obama for a whole year with Obamacare, saying, well, if you just change this, we'll think about it. If you just change that, we'll think about it. Oh, gee, we have to think about it. And, a year later, they were like, oh, yeah, no, not one vote. We're not going to, no way. After he had just given them all kinds of things. I mean, I'm assuming your colleagues know this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, many of us are skeptical that there's another 5 Republican votes, right? They went through all the fanfare of announcing this deal, but, it takes 10 Republican votes. And, Republicans have been pretty clear. They're waiting for 2022. They don't want to do anything for the American people because they want to try to beat us and get the majority again. And, at what point do we continue to try to kick that football? So our hope is that if this does fail, that the Senate puts a fairly tight clock on this, then we just put more into the reconciliation bill, because even Joe Manchin's accepted that we need to move a reconciliation bill. Let's then put some of that infrastructure in there, and we can do that and try to get it done. The most important thing is we need to get something done for the people. We've already delivered a lot in the rescue plan. We can deliver more with this, but we can't let Republicans just be obstructionists for the sake of the 2022 election.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Well, let's pick up our phone calls here and see what's on the mind of our listeners and viewers. Wayne in Palatine, Illinois. Wayne, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, thanks for having me on. And this will be a quick call because it won't be.
So what's your question, Wayne?
Well, anyway, I'll get. My question is, with all the stuff that Trump has done in the past, I want either Congressman or even your Tom indication of, do you really think that he will be put in jail?
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest thing to say would be no, because I don't think we've put a lot of presidents in jail, right? So, I think there's that. I think, the question is what else places like New York and other places that are looking at convicting his organization or others around him for, and does some of that get closer and closer to Donald Trump? I mean, clearly we know it's likely Donald Trump was involved in many of these things, but whether or not that puts him in jail, I think, honestly, Wayne, it's probably not as likely. But, if in history people understand that Donald Trump is a twice impeached failed president who, during his tenure, 500,000 people died from a pandemic that was mishandled. And on top of it, that it turns out that he was corrupt on multiple levels. I'm not exactly sure if that's the best thing for the Trump brand, but I think that might be what would hurt Donald Trump more than anything, since, he really has been such an egotist in office, to see his name that dirtied. And I think ultimately that may be the best you get.
Nancy in Woodland, California. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
So far we've seen about 550 or so regular people charged with their part in the insurrection, which is good. But will we ever see any of the Republican politicians who are complicit in this charged with anything? If it were reversed, the Republicans would have had the Democrats in jail that night.
Yeah, Nancy, I hope that's what we'll get out of this commission, is if there was anyone directly involved. I mean, right now, we don't have a smoking gun. We have a question of whether someone gave tours the night before and what that was, if that was a true tour or a recon mission. We know that some people went and spoke at the rallies. We know that some people may know some things that day, and we want to get to the bottom of that. And that's why we now have a commission. We try to do it in a more bipartisan way. Clearly, they weren't going to do that once again. So Nancy moved ahead anyway, and now they're going to hopefully use their subpoena powers aggressively, and we'll get more of that information. But I don't think that right now you can say definitively member X did, this or that. That's what may come out of some of the findings here. But we really want to make sure that obviously this kind of a stain never happens again. You can't have a sedition, active sedition that was inspired by the president on our U.S. Capitol, especially since that was the first attack in a couple hundred years on our U.S. Capitol. It's a big thing, and we have to get to the bottom of it, and we have to make sure that we prosecute anyone who is criminally involved.
Brad in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Mr. Pocan, Congressman Pocan, why are the Democrats being so soft on the Republicans, specifically the vax haters? Because, pardon me, I'm a liberal. I very much believe in God, but I don't give a flying rat's behind about those people who don't want to get a vaccine. Personally, my attitude is the more of them that get sick and stuff and die, let them learn their lesson the hard way. These are not nice people. To really use an example, I'm about a third of the way through, about maybe a quarter of the way through The Cruelty is the Point by Mr. Adam Serwer, I believe. And these are not nice people. They don't respond to an outstretched hand. They only respond.
Brad, let's see what Congressman Pocan has to say.
Yeah, Brad, I said I'm going to answer because the one question I do think, we're going after people and trying to go after the fallacies they put out, whether it be vaccinations or otherwise. And people are more aggressive, whether or not the media you follow is picking it up, may be part of the problem. But let me disagree with one thing you said. You should care if someone's not vaccinated, because the more people that aren't vaccinated, the more likely you're going to have spread, whether it be the Delta variant or other variants in the future. So, first of all, I don't wish death on anyone, and I don't think anyone should, or illness for that matter. But there also is a different interest that we don't want this to continue to spread, and we do have to have more people be responsible to make sure that we've got that safety in our borders. And then I hope we also are getting more vaccines around the world. But, it does matter. And we do have to care about it if we're going to really make sure that we can completely be who we were pre-COVID-19.
Well, also to put it in terms Republicans can understand, every time one of these unvaccinated people gets sick, there's a public health expense. And an awful lot of them, particularly in the southern states, are uninsured, which means that you and I are picking up the bill through our taxes.
Yeah, but again, there are hypocrites, right? They don't care if it suits their agenda. I mean, I'm just looking at the New York Times map, and Missouri and Arkansas and Louisiana are pretty ugly right now. The fact that Steve Scalise finally is admitting that he's going around and getting vaccinated, that's all part of our problem. It's this continuing to worship their cult leader, even though the cult leader himself got a vaccine. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it really and truly is. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan taking your calls right after this break. And welcome back. Jonathan in Portland, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. I was noticing the disparity between Canada's vaccination rate and the U.S. Canada has almost a 70% vaccination rate for first vaccinations, and they have a third of our mortality. And I would attribute that to their national health care system, and I would submit that offering people who are not vaccinated health insurance, either on as part of Medicare or some type of national health insurance, rather than trying to push some kind of gimmick or lottery, or would go farther to getting the nation back on its footing. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, because I haven't heard anyone suggest that a national health care system of some kind would be the way to get everyone vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, I've been, and I am, and have been, and will be a strong supporter of Medicare for all. We need a system like virtually every other industrialized country that makes sure every citizen has health care. And I think that would help, because hopefully people would have more confidence in a healthcare system because they're able to access it, right? So I agree on that front. I don't see that right now being something Republicans are going to accept in the short term, because they don't even accept the fact that we should aggressively still having people be vaccinated. I mean, the real problem is just, there's this continuing to play to the cult, the Donald Trump cult, that wants to somehow say Donald Trump didn't do anything wrong, and therefore they don't want to admit you need a vaccine, even though Donald Trump and all of them have gotten their vaccines. It's good enough for them, but they don't necessarily care about others as they continue this rhetoric and this lie that's out there. You're right. If we had a universal health care system, more people would be vaccinated, no question. But I don't see the Republicans caring because this is just one more tool for them looking at 2022, and that's all they care about.
I wrote an op-ed a week or so ago suggesting that perhaps part of this strategy on the part of Republicans to encourage people not to get vaccinated is to try to create enough of a wave of infection that it'll crash the economy and thus set Democrats up for a loss in 2022. I'm curious your thoughts on that, and if any of your colleagues are thinking the way that I am, or is this just conspiracy land?
No, I mean, I truly think we've seen them say so many things, and they've been caught on video saying it's all about making sure nothing happens till 2022. And when it comes to vaccines, if you yourself are getting vaccinated and yet playing to this rhetoric and helping promote the idea that somehow vaccines are bad or you don't need one, you have to have that goal. I mean, your goal can't be to kill your own constituents, I would hope. But it does seem to kind of work towards they want to have don't want to have success. They don't want to have Joe Biden have success in what he's doing. Now, the rescue plan was a big bill. We've got to do more. We want to do this infrastructure and reconciliation bill, but that's what they fear. If we actually get something done, something they've never been able to do for the people, they know that'll hurt them in 2022. We just want to do what actually people want us to do, which is get something done. But I think they're playing a risky game. As long as they're not willing to stand up for Donald Trump, and this is their best strategy they have, I think it's a pretty risky strategy. Yeah, I noticed on Monday when the Dow was down 700 points, there was a lot of high-fiving going on across right-wing media. Yeah. It's creepy. Anyhow, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. You can check out his website at pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally, when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote. Whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that. And, in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the framers of the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Tom. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Nicholas.
Representative Pocan, I have what I hope is a very serious question that it won't sound to be at first. I want to know what you, everybody concerned, can do to push for any and all possible convictions of this Trump crime family, if I may use that term, and I may. Michelle Goldberg just had a very important article, I thought, about what loneliness does to people. Studies are showing very clearly it drives them towards acceptance of authoritarianism. If we get any more disaffected people in this country, we're cooked. Our goose is cooked. We cannot afford to let these people off. If the public is clearly seeing all of the illegalities that have transpired over those 4 years and more, of course, the public, much more of the public, a greater percentage, is going to become yet further disaffected and may very possibly, according to studies, swing more towards authoritarianism. It isn't just about getting the bad guy. It's about saving the country. What can you do? Your fellow congressmen, your friends, senators, your constituents, Tom, what in the world can we do? We can't just let this ride again. And thank you. I'll take your answer off the air.
Yeah, Nicholas, I mean, I think to various levels, it's hard for the average person to do a lot. I think at Congress, clearly the January 6th commission to make sure we get to the bottom of what actually happened, having other oversight in committees that they are doing right now to look at things that may have happened during the last administration. But as we're still moving forward, making sure we're doing that. But largely it's in the hands of many of these state courts right now that are dealing with that. So how, as an individual, we can affect the actual outcome of that court case, I think very little. However, I do think that, the more we help to get the message out about what's going on, the tough part, Nicholas, is, we know hundreds of thousands of people died from COVID-19 that didn't need to, and yet so many people still came out and voted for Donald Trump. We know that he was impeached, and yet people didn't care. We know all of this stuff because, unfortunately, I think we're fighting against something even bigger, which is, an issue, especially around racism, that's just so different. And we have to absolutely address that to really, I think, have the bigger impact we need to have. But specifically to your question, in court cases, I don't know as much what as an individual can impact. And, we can at least keep the pressure up by trying to get more information through hearings. But I understand what you're saying. I just also think it's going to be hard for an individual to impact a state's criminal conviction of someone right now.
David in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. I was just wondering about the congressman's thoughts on expanding the Supreme Court. I know that some people think if we go ahead and expand the Supreme Court, then there might be an issue with in the future, the Republicans just doing the same thing. But I think I have a way for that to be headed off. If we allow the president this year to add 2 justices, then next year the same thing, then the next thing, and again in 2023, that would bring it to 15. Continuing that, every year after that, the president would be able to add 2 more justices, but the ones with the highest seniority would simply be put back on the appeals courts. So we'd continue to have just 15 justices. Every president would always be able to every year add 2 justices, and therefore there would be a term limit, and probably any future Republican president wouldn't have any reason to stop this.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, David. The thing is, a future Congress, assuming it's a Republican majority in both houses, and president could still change that, right, law, and they could open it up and have more. That would be the one question. I don't think just because Republicans could do it should be a reason that we don't do something. I think if it needs to happen, we should do it. And when it comes to the court, I think it's a serious conversation we should have. We've had throughout our history change the size of the court. There's no reason we can't have that conversation again. And, personally, I think it's probably a good idea to do that. I think the same thing on the filibuster. Filibuster isn't sacrosanct. It's not something our founding fathers gave us. It came in because there was nothing in the statute that showed how you could stop debate, and then it changed throughout time, and it was used quite aggressively on things like Jim Crow laws and things. And we could change it again, and just because someone else could, I guarantee they'll do whatever they think they need to do in the future. We saw them hold up a Supreme Court nominee from a president for a whole year. Let's not make that the argument, but if it needs to happen, it should, and I think we should have that conversation.
Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your call, member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. You can find his website at Pocan, POCAN.house.gov, and you can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. Back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. We're in this camera, right? 3. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. This is from chapter 1, although the introduction is fascinating too, where she talks about, Rhodes scholarships and stuff, but this is chapter 1. I sit in a living room, a cozy space, warm in the early summer. I'm perched on the edge of a sofa next to Valerie, the home's owner, a lovely black woman in her late 40s. Across from us, seated close together on a wide settee meant for one, are her 2 children, a son and a daughter. Politicians rarely visit their streets, which are nestled in a poorer community in South Georgia. Valerie beams with pride that both her children are headed to college in the fall. David, 17, plans to study criminology. Maya, 18, her belly round with her first child, intends to become a middle school teacher. Both newly graduated from high school, Maya will give birth in mere weeks and begin college months later, an unwed teen mother. Her intended school is more than 3 hours north of her home, so her mother will raise her newborn baby while she starts her freshman year. Valerie speaks matter-of-factly about the coming challenge, raising a new child just as hers leaves the nest. Still, she is determined that both her children pursue college degrees that she never received. Maya, the mother-to-be, wonders how she'll do so far away from home and her baby. Yet in the next breath, she explains how college will be the best for her and her child. Their future success rests upon her. I've come to their home as part of my campaign for governor, so I asked Valerie what she expects of someone like me. What can I do to help make lives like hers better? In her soft voice, she replies, she just wants options for financial aid for her children. They will succeed, she says, if they can afford to stay in school. As I look around the modest home passed down through the generations, I understand both the pride and the desperation tangled in her response. She got them through and has given them the tools to carve out better lives for themselves. We chat more about the worries she's lived with all those years, our discussion turning to the crime and poverty in their neighborhood. Then I ask Valerie what she wants. At first, all I get in response is a quizzical look to suggest I need to reconsider my bid for higher office. Or that suggests. I repeat, what do you want for you? What secret dream do you have for yourself? Her confused expression turns to one of surprise. I don't know, she tells me. I've been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. You must want something, I probe, something you'd like to do for you? A daycare, she admits quietly. I'd like to start a daycare center for unwed mothers like my daughter, so more girls can finish school and pursue their dreams. But that ambition is beyond her. Her body language, her tone of voice, her averted gaze speak louder than her words. I press her, but she demurs with a smile. Let's just see what happens if you win the governor's job, she says. Valerie's house in South Georgia is not too different from the squat red brick house where I grew up on South Street in Gulfport, Mississippi. An oak tree grew out in our front yard, shadowing the front sidewalk, forbidding grass to grow beneath its shade. Pink azaleas bloomed each spring from bushes that flanked the front door. Our rented house and the other set close by teemed with children, all black, all working class. We played in our postage-stamped yards, make believing the fantastical. Superhero exploits, cops and robbers. As we got older, we'd talk about moving to New Orleans or living in one of the mansions along the beachfront that lay less than 5 miles away, across the railroad tracks that ran in between our neighborhood and the more wealthy environs. We dreamed of more, while our parents' lives centered around survival and making it from paycheck to paycheck. Instinctively, we understood that more had to be possible, even if we didn't know what to do to get there. These imaginings, these desires, are the roots of ambition. As adults, like Valerie, we tend to edit our desires until they fit our construction of who we're supposed to become. In such a world, I wouldn't dare dream of running for higher office, for mayor or governor or president. At least for now, Valerie sees herself retiring in 20 more years from Piggly Wiggly as a cashier, rather than as a small business owner who helps the community raise its children. From our brief meeting, I could see she had the fire, albeit of a low burn, of a minority leader. She had ambition, she had vision, but she didn't have the faith, and understandably so. Whether we come from working class neighborhoods or grow up comfortably middle class, minorities rarely come of age explicitly thinking about what we want and how to get it. People already in power almost never have to think about whether they belong in the room, much less if they would be listened to once outside. These men, and they are usually men and typically white, do not have to grapple with low expectations based on gender or race or class. Ambition for them begins with reminiscences of old times and older friendships or newer alliances. The ends have already been decided. Only the means are to be discussed.
Most potential minority leaders feel the same lack of faith Valerie had, at least at some point in their evolution. We may not know how to get the first job, let alone make it to the big chair. We don't know how to take the leap from accepting our faiths to actually changing them, and not just a little, but radically. Then there are those who simply don't know what they want. The drive to achieve burns inside, often without a clear target. We want to be something, but what that is remains hazy. Often we cannot articulate our goals because they lie just beyond the reach of who we're supposed to be. Ambition's scale is irrelevant. What holds us back is not scope, it's fear. And because we don't know what to call our dreams, don't know how to make them happen, or are pretty sure we'll be disappointed, we just stand still. We become a minority, but becoming a minority leader demands that we embrace ambition as our due. Stacey Abrams.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So people wonder, why militias all of a sudden? How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes? Where did this come from? You know, the last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Antonin Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And it has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, taking your calls. Alejandro in Miami, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hello, Congressman. How are you doing? Yeah. So anyways, I just want, obviously, as you heard last week, France implemented a national, vaccine mandate. I guess, at least for healthcare workers, they all have to be vaccinated by September, and you need a vaccine passport to go to pretty much anywhere, bars, restaurants, what have you. I know that the federal government's limited in its delegation authority to, do the same thing as France does. But what can Congress do to push us towards a vaccine mandate, or push us to get everyone more vaccinated and to implement the same thing that France did? I mean, to get more compliant people, because we can only, coddle anti-vaxxers for so long. We can't, coddle them forever. So I think, what can we do to push them in the right direction? Thank you very much.
Congressman? Oh, Congressman, you're muted. I think your microphone is muted. If you can hear me, I can't hear you. So I'm still not hearing you. I will put the congressman on hold so that Joyce can talk to him and figure out what's going on. And just to the point that the caller just made, this is the message from Emmanuel Macron, the current president of France. And it's just amazing. He said, I am in favor of the French line right now. I no longer have any intention of sacrificing my life, my time, my freedom, and the adolescence of my daughters, as well as their right to study properly, for those who refuse to be vaccinated, said the president of France yesterday. He said, this time you are staying at home, not us, speaking of people in France who are unvaccinated. Congressman Pocan, your response to that.
Yeah, sorry about that. Alejandro, I think, there's a lot we can do really easily, like just quit going around like Ron Johnson from Wisconsin and having hearings about people who are harmed by vaccines. It's such an incredibly small number that even amplifying messages like that is really intended to have people not get vaccines. Having people like Steve Scalise in leadership on the Republican side not wait until now to get vaccinated. Have them tell the truth and get people in their districts to get vaccinated. If we would all have a common message, because we have a common enemy right now in COVID-19, that would go far enough to get us where we need to. We've had great initial acceptance of getting shots, and we're so close to that herd number. But, there is a race against time for variants. And also, on top of it, I would argue we have to keep doing what President Biden's been doing even more aggressively in getting vaccines around the world, because even if we solve it here, there's going to be variants growing as long as it's around the world. So we're also going to have to continue being involved. But, I know France did what they did. I don't know if you're going to see that happen out of such a tight margin we have in the House and the Senate. And I don't think you're going to see that happen in many states. But certainly we could have more adult behavior happen really easily, and it would go really far in getting people vaccinated.
Ralph in New Brunswick, New Jersey, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hey, I was just wondering, was I the only one that missed the TED Talks with Bill Gates and Obama in 2016 telling us a pandemic is coming in 2020? And why are we listening to Bill Gates, who's making hundreds of billions of dollars off of these vaccines, and so is Fauci? Now, you can call me a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
When they told us this was coming and they're making money off it, the two of them, and they're forcing these vaccines on people?
Right. I'm going to stop him right there and let you respond.
Yeah. But, Tom, this is one of the problems. I also hear from people who I have respect for on the left who have heard some of this. I mean, there's good reason to distrust pharmaceutical companies, right? You and I have been fighting against what they've been doing for a very long time. But in this particular incident, I don't think what they're doing is manufacturing something to make money. In this case, we are solving a global pandemic that has killed over 600,000 people in this country alone and millions on the globe, I think over 2 million people. So, we really need to, I think, make the case that the smart thing to do for your community, for yourself, for your family, and for your neighbors is to get vaccinated and also continue to have some common sense. Extra precaution, wearing a mask if you're in larger crowds, et cetera, I think is just good sense. But we've got to fight this and not let whether it be people who might otherwise just, not trust pharmaceutical companies, think that they don't want to get the vaccine. That's one thing. And then there's an awful lot of people who are purposely putting this out there because they don't want things to get good under President Biden. That's a ridiculous notion. People like that, I wish I had the power to do something about. But we really need to understand that this is no different than if we were in a war with a common enemy. We are in a war with a common enemy right now. It is COVID-19. And anyone who's not taking the side against the virus is certainly taking the side of the virus. And unfortunately, way too many Republicans are doing that right now.
Harry in Waukegan, Illinois, you are on the air with Representative Pocan. Harry?
Hello.
Hey.
Yes, hello. I had a comment on as far as like framing messaging and anything that's that we could do, the Congress could do under the law, maybe inside and outside. One is passing or trying to pass something that has to do with the freedom to wear a mask for self-protection, whether it goes anywhere or not. Another one is for the terrorists and insurrectionists who did it and who were in the Capitol, at the Capitol, outside the Capitol, suspending their vote, just like we do for people who go to prison. And of course, the other one is, this is like all identity politics. So that's pretty much what I had to say. Other than Biden wouldn't have won the election without Republican votes.
Okay, Harry, thank you, Congressman.
Yeah, Harry, you had a lot there. So let me just take the last point. I think, in fact, the Republican Assembly Speaker in Wisconsin said what you just said, and it didn't get a lot of coverage, Tom, and I wish it would have. Donald Trump went after him about a month ago or a few weeks ago before the Republican convention because he wasn't doing enough to go after the voter fraud that occurred. And we've seen all these Republicans, instantly do whatever Donald Trump says after he challenges them. And the Republican speaker in an interview said, well, they asked him about, was it election fraud? He goes, well, it could have been election fraud, but we also have to remember that 50,000 people in Wisconsin voted for a Republican for Congress but didn't vote for Donald Trump. And he won Wisconsin. Joe Biden won by 20,000. That's pretty significant to come from a Republican, but it's also significant because it's called a fact, Tom. And I think, to Harry's point, I mean, there were a lot of Republicans and people who didn't vote for Donald Trump. That's the reason Donald Trump lost the election, not all this other stuff. The rest is for Donald Trump's ego, and it's rights for people who are satisfying their cult leader. But the reality is just in the raw numbers. It had nothing to do with election fraud. It had, in Wisconsin, 50,000 people voted for a Republican for Congress but didn't vote for Donald Trump. That would have been the difference in our state, and then some.
Wow. Barbara in Old Fort, North Carolina, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Thank you. My question has to do with voting. And I say this because it's my personal opinion. Many of our representatives are not representing us. Why are the hot ticket items like health care, voter rights, climate change not something the American people can actually vote on a ballot?
Yeah, I mean, Barbara, you'd be talking about a fundamental change, right, through a direct initiative process. And, we just, that's not what our country was founded on. That's not what we have. We have it in some states and local communities. We don't have it nationally. I think the biggest way you have an impact is through elections, and I know that there's so much effort to make people not care, to think that everyone's bad and not vote, and that's usually done from the right because that's how they win. If more people get out and vote, they agree with Democrats and they'll vote that way. But if you can convince them that everyone's bad, everyone's not going to take care of things, then they're successful. That's why, we always like higher turnout because it's going to work because people actually agree with us on those fundamental issues of healthcare and climate change and quality pay and jobs. It's just...
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Tom. I hear the music. I'm stopping.
Yeah, no, it's great. You know the timing about as well as I do, I think. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And, of course, you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Back with more of your calls for him in just a moment. Welcome back. Kathy in Thielen, California. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
My son died last year of insanity, and the reason he died was because they cut him off insulin because he wouldn't go to the doctor, and no one will help him. And I tried to get help all the time, and they won't help an insane person unless they ask for it themselves. And I want to know why they can't change the laws back to having their families put them in mental hospitals.
Involuntary admission or whatever
Yeah, and he also he threatened people, and one time he grabbed me by the neck and they keep calling the cops, and all they say is like I'm a trespasser, and to get him evicted and all that kind of crap.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't even help me when he died. I had to come in 60 miles to break into the house because they wouldn't do it.
Kathy, thank you. Congressman?
Yeah, first of all, so sorry, Kathy. I mean, let me offer perhaps a more positive alternative, which would be why wouldn't we just make sure that we have health care for every single person in this country that includes mental health care so that you'll never have to have someone like your son get to the point that whether it be the violent actions or the not getting the insulin they need to live, which is a whole other issue, given that the patent for insulin was sold for $1 almost 100 years ago, and we're still paying what we're paying for insulin. But if we actually had mental health care treated like health care, for one, you'd have far fewer people in our prison systems, and that would put more money for things like education and housing and other priorities. But two, it's the humane thing we should be doing. It shouldn't be in the greatest nation on the planet that we have one of the most amateurish, mediocre healthcare systems because we don't have everyone covered. We have quality healthcare, but it's not available to everyone, and that's the real problem. And I would argue a better solution might be to make sure that we just had actual mental health care for everyone so that we could resolve the issues before they happen, like happened to your son.
Chuck in Hood River, Oregon. You're on the air with Representative Pocan. We have about a minute and 20 seconds.
Gentlemen, thank you for taking my call. My question for the congressman is, could the president set aside sign an executive order to set aside the filibuster for the rest of his term, and put the ball in the court of the next president. And if it's a Republican president, well, we'll see how bad they like the filibuster then.
Yeah, Chuck, I'm quite sure he can't do that. I don't think that's something he can do via an executive order. You do have limited powers, and I don't think that is one of them. But I appreciate you're trying to, like we all are, trying to figure out how to get around it. I just don't think that's a possible way. And let me just mention Hood River is also one of my favorite places in the country. It's been way too long since I've been there. You have a beautiful part of America there.
Oh, you got to come out and visit us. I'm guessing that Chuck doesn't realize that the filibuster is part of the Senate rules. It's not a law,
right,
and it's not something that the president has any control over. Only the Senate can change its own rules.
Exactly. That would be the easier way of putting it. But, I think a lot of people assume, with executive order, you can do anything. And, it's really quite limited on what you actually can do. And then, of course, it's temporary because it's not put into statute.
Right. Exactly. Which is why one of the reasons why Trump's executive orders around tariffs and things were so incoherent and ineffective. Yeah. Okay. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls on Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Pocan.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Back with more of your calls for him in just a moment. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time. And that was the United States of America. It's a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Jake in Elizabeth, Pennsylvania, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. I've got one real quick thing I'd like to point out. There's a paper by the title of Why the Working Class is Giving Up on Democracy by Umar Haq, published May the 17th of this year. And in my own family, I happen to know that that this eternal vigilance required for democracy to continue is a thing of the past with a lot of these Republicans. Just thought you'd like to know.
Thoughts on that, Congressman?
Yeah, no, Jake, I'll tell you, one of the saddest things, because I've been doing this for 30 years, local, state, and federal government, is watching Republicans right now in such, it's always been sometimes they don't want someone to succeed because they think it'll hurt their chances in an election. But when what they're actually fighting against right now is to stop the deaths and the long-term health consequences of something like COVID-19, and they're willing to sacrifice that, I'm at a loss to explain how that can be an acceptable trade-off. And yet, Donald Trump barely operated as someone with any kind of morals or values. I just didn't think it would be contagious to so many other people.
Eric in Soledad, California, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. I'm just wondering if there's any chance of lowering the retirement age to 65 for somebody who's 64 years old.
That's the Social Security age.
Yeah, not soon, Eric. In fact, for a while, don't forget, when I first got to Congress, there were a lot of proposals about should you be increasing that age in order to have Social Security survive. Much, much easier way is just to lift the cap, at what point rich people don't pay more into Social Security would keep that alive. But I think, with people living longer, although today, Tom, we saw our life expectancy went down 1.5 years in this country because of COVID, which I think is pretty telling for how tough this last 1.5 years has been. But I don't see that happening, but I do think we want to definitely fight against any efforts to try to raise that age. I think, one thing that I always try to explain, Eric, is, in certain fields, you just can't do the job at those ages. And, for many who proposed actually raising the age, which is where you've heard more of the discussion around, if you're working in the trades and you work with your body and your hands, a lot of those jobs are not going to be possible in the future. And instead, I think, let's just lift that cap. Let's make sure we can keep Social Security to work in the future. In fact, let's change how we do benefits so people can live more comfortably in their older years. But I don't see it being lowered anytime soon.
Joe in Denver, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you for your time and for taking my call. This is in regard to the infrastructure deal, more or less. We keep hearing about vision, dental, hearing that's included in there, but we never hear anything about pharmacies, about our drugs, about the 20% gap that's still there that seniors are paying every month. I mean,
the Medicare donut hole.
Yeah, the donut hole. That's right. It's costing them $150, $60, $80, sometimes more a month. Whereas the dental, vision, hearing are only for me, it's only $35 a month. It's almost inconsequential. We need to end the war on senior citizens. We need to repeal the Reagan tax cuts on Social Security. We need to fix the donut hole. We need to get pharma included into all this stuff. Why aren't we talking about that more? And why aren't we hearing about that in the infrastructure deal?
I love that phrase, the Republican war on senior citizens.
Yeah. Well, and Joe, I would add the fact that we can't negotiate for drug prices through Medicare. Use that immense purchasing power to lower the price of drugs. It would be that would save more than probably everything we've just talked about, that one item. And yet, as I think I mentioned earlier in the show, one of the biggest reasons why it doesn't happen, not only is it a 50-50 Senate, but there are 1,500 lobbyists for Big Pharma in Washington, D.C. That's the equivalent of 3 for every member of the House and Senate. That's astronomical when you think of how much influence an industry has. So when you wonder why we pay so much more in the United States and other countries for the exact same drugs, why we can't negotiate for those prices, drug prices with Medicare, that's exactly why. And that's part of why we pass bills like H.R. 1 to try to scale that back. And that's part of why those bills are so hard to pass, especially with a 50-50 Senate.
John in Los Angeles, you're on the air with Representative Pocan. We're down to about a minute, a little over a minute to the end of the show, the end of the hour.
Good morning, guys. Thanks for what you do. Real quickly, they need to take a playbook out of McConnell's, magician kit. And with Joe Manchin, they ought to run somebody against him. Don't let him go down in history, as just this guy that, couldn't do this, do that. He's the reason why. It doesn't matter about infrastructure, doesn't matter about anything. If you don't have fair elections, they're just going to undo everything you do, and we're going to have an autocracy for 40 years. So, get the people in Virginia to say, hey, look, you want more three-headed fish? 40% of their rivers are polluted. Vote for Manchin, you get 80%. Put a guy in there that's going to do what he was supposed
John,
to do.
let's let Congressman Pocan respond. We're running out of time here.
Yeah, John, you bring up a good point. You think that people would care more. However, one of the things that we have to remember is West Virginia, Donald Trump won by 36 points. So, we have to get Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema and a few others on some issues across the line of understanding what power they have and what power they're giving up right now. And I think that's where it has to happen, from the grassroots, from their constituents. So perhaps to your point is people from West Virginia need to call every single day Joe Manchin's office and make sure that his staff hear it loudly about what they really want from their U.S. Senator.
Congressman, thanks so much for dropping by today. It's great having you with us.
As always, Tom, thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you. Congressman Mark Pocan. You can check out his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. We'll be back with Julio Rivera and a discussion of vaccine passports right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump business organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We've come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero.
A photographic history.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. Just a couple of data points that I want to lay out here for you all. On Monday, Dr. Brittany Kobia, a physician in Alabama, said that all of the patients in her hospital who are dying right now, 100% of them, are unvaccinated people. And she said one of the last things they do before they're intubated is beg me for the vaccine. These are people who are, in all probability going to die. She says, I hold their hand and tell them, I'm sorry, but it's too late. Meanwhile, over at Fox News, starting in June of this year, last month, they instituted a vaccine pass. They call it the Fox Clear Pass, where you have to prove that you're vaccinated to get into the building and interact with other staff people. And if you don't, then every day you have to be tested for COVID. Meanwhile, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France last week, said, okay, that's it. You can't go to bars, restaurants, sporting events, anything, unless you can prove that you're vaccinated. They've got an electronic essentially a vaccine passport over there. And I thought this one particular line, somebody challenged him on this during a press conference, and he said, I am in favor of the French line right now. I no longer, in other words, people were saying, well, other countries don't mandate vaccine passports. He says, I'm in favor of the French line right now. I no longer have any intention of sacrificing my life, my time, my freedom, and the adolescence of my daughters, as well as their right to study properly, to those who refuse to be vaccinated. This time, you are staying at home, not us. So, should we have vaccine passports in the United States? Should we mandate vaccines? On the line with us is Julio Rivera, editorial director of Reactionary Times, contributor to Newsmax, American Thinker, and Townhall.com, reactionarytimes.com, and on Twitter. Oh, yeah, it's Julio. Julio, welcome back. So, ready to mandate vaccines?
No. I mean, there was a Saginaw, Michigan kid, 13 years old, that just died recently after taking the second dose of the vaccine. And listen, obviously, that's a rare case.
Hey, listen, there was a guy here in Oregon who died the other day after drinking milk.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Listen, the far majority of these cases with COVID, over 80% are asymptomatic. I know that a lot of people were criticizing the vaccine because of how fast it was produced. There's arguments on both sides of that. Obviously,
there are no arguments on the other side, Julio.
No, there are. Because
people who are vaccinated are not dying, and when they do, it's so rare that it becomes the exception that people like you can point to. But 99% of the people, 99+% of the people who are dying right now, and 97+% of the people who are hospitalized right now are unvaccinated. We do know that, Julio.
Listen, that's fine. You're citing examples from one doctor. The fact of the matter is,
I'm citing examples from the Centers for Disease Control.
Yesterday, between Dr. Fauci and the exchange between Dr. Fauci and Dr. Rand Paul, if there's gain-of-function research being done in that laboratory, we still don't know a lot about
which has nothing to do with whether we should be vaccinating people.
Whether or not this vaccine is even effective against it. There's people that are getting sick after the fact, and there's all kinds of reports going back and forth. I actually just read something that was published by a British university saying that the antibodies persist in your body for up to 9 months after you've actually had it and already are over COVID-19. So listen,
but the flip side of that, Julio, is that the Delta variant will reinfect people who have within the last month had the first strain or even the alpha strain of COVID. That the Delta strain.
So are we supposed to get vaccinated, indefinitely? Just every year, we're going to rely on these vaccines that are rushed out to the market.
If you want to live,
completely properly
and keep in mind, about 20% of men who have had symptomatic COVID never ended up in the hospital, never died. But 20% of men who have had symptomatic COVID, the major long-term side effect of it is erectile dysfunction. Doesn't that alarm people on the right?
Listen, it's a bad thing, I guess. But listen, there's as far as
the vaccine would prevent that,
mandating people to take a vaccine which they don't necessarily feel comfortable with what went into developing the vaccine. That's the problem I have. You're a liberal, Tom.
Okay.
Aren't you supposed to be all about choice? If I don't feel
so let me back up from that, Julio.
Why should I be forced to do to travel around?
I'll give you that. I'm not, I asked the question, should we be mandating vaccines or should we be doing vaccine passports? I am not specifically suggesting that we should be mandating vaccines, although I think that, within a month or 2 or 3 when these vaccines finally get FDA approval so that they can be mandated by schools and other institutions like measles is and smallpox and things like that, they should be included in that. But for right now, I would like to see a vaccine passport. We've got this, what is it called, V-Safe, I think, V-Safe over. The CDC has a vaccine passport system all in place. All they need to do is push a button. I actually signed up for it. New York and California have actually rolled them out. The Empire Passport Pass in New York. I don't know what it's called in California. But bottom line is, Louise and I, the only restaurant that we've gone to in the last month or two since we've been reopened, has been 2 restaurants have been restaurants that have large outdoor seating areas where we can sit 6 feet away from people, because I don't want to get the Delta. Even though I'm fully vaccinated, I could still get the Delta variant and end up with long COVID, and it's not going to kill me, but it could make me really, really sick. I don't want that to happen.
Exactly.
If a restaurant was to have a sign that said, "You will be checked for your COVID vaccination status," just like they check to see if you're 21 if they serve alcohol.
That's their right as a private business. They can
I
do
would
that.
start patronizing that restaurant.
Yeah, and that's your right to feel that way. Listen, I personally have not gotten the vaccine. My daughter has an autoimmune condition who's 18 years old. She had to get it. And my mother, who's 80 years old, got it, and I feel good about both of them having it. I personally don't have any issues, so I haven't had it. I think, like I said, it boils down to choice. If private businesses want to mandate, and they were doing this in baseball stadiums, they were having vaccinated sections and things like that. If they feel the need to do that, you can go ahead and do that. It really is a matter to me that people have to go ahead and kind of figure out what's right for them, whether it's businesses, whether it's individuals, and that's okay. But once you start saying that you can't go in and out of the country and they stifle your ability to move around the world, that's a problem. I'm a multinational myself, and I wouldn't want to see, that I have to be forced to get a vaccine in order to go back to Europe. I'm back in the United States now, but I'm leaving back to Europe in a matter of a couple of days, and I go back and forth, obviously, to see my kids. I don't want to have that issue.
Yeah. I believe Canada is requiring proof of vaccination when they reopen their border with the United States, I think on August 9th. I could be wrong on that, but so you're okay with individual businesses saying you've got to prove your vaccine status to come in if they decide to make that choice. Why
exactly, because liability insurance, they may affect their costs depending on how they handle COVID.
Absolutely.
Going forward,
so why not schools?
We don't know how a lot of this is going to play out. Yeah.
Why not schools?
No, if it comes down to where those brand new vaccines that were kind of hastily put together, and granted, it was based on a lot of the research that was done on SARS, and that's what I was saying, that there's good arguments on both sides of the vaccine because, it is newer, but it was based on older research.
It's a 20-year-old vaccine, really.
If elements of it are, and elements of the research that was used to develop it are.
Sure.
If schools go ahead and do that, what are you going to do? I mean, unless you want to send your kids to a non-vaccine mandating private school or something like that. If you can go ahead.
Well, that happened. I mean, there was this Catholic school in the news a couple of days ago where they're saying we will not accept any children who are vaccinated. Actually, it wasn't a Catholic school. It was some right-wing Protestant school, a religious school. Because, don't you know, the vaccinated people can spread the spike protein or some weird, QAnon theory.
There's a lot of things going on right now, good information and bad information. Ultimately, like I said, it depends on the individual. I'm not getting the vaccine until I feel that compelled to do so. At this point, I don't. I think it's more of a risk to me to take it than to not take it. I trust my immune system.
Okay, well, good luck with that, Julio. I hope you don't end up with permanent limp dick disease. I'm assuming I can say that on the radio. Julio Rivera, reactionarytimes.com. Oh, yeah, it's Julio on Twitter. Thank you, Julio.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour. Should we be mandating at least vaccine passports? 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. And welcome back. What a day, huh? Earl in Hyde Park, Illinois. Hey, Earl, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV.
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. And I wanted to respond to that gentleman that you were just talking to. I don't know what countries that he's been going to in Europe, but most of the countries in Europe has a vaccination passport.
Yeah. Earl, I don't want to out Julio. I don't know if he wants people knowing what country he lives in, but I can tell you that it's one of the former Eastern European countries, and they're a whole lot more lax about this than are the former Western European countries.
But how can he get on an airplane without proving that he's had?
Well, some of these countries that used to be part of the Soviet bloc and are now members of the European Union. They have very different standards than France or Germany or England. So.
Well, I mean, I know when I was traveling to Europe, they were very tight as far as health was concerned.
Yeah. It all depends on the country. It all depends on the country and whether you're going to have to change planes and things like that. I think he may have a tough time coming. I don't know. We'll see, but it's
and let me ask you a question: can he get back in without it proving that he had he's had his vaccine shot or has had a test within the last 10 days? Can he get back into the country?
I don't know. I'm guessing actually the countries that require proof of vaccination, their fallback is, and this is for people, it's intended for people who can't get vaccinated, people who have compromised immune systems, people who have allergic reactions to vaccines, stuff like that. There's a small, a tiny fraction of 1% of the population that just can't take vaccines. And so for those people, they can get a nose swab. They can get a COVID test, and if their COVID test is negative within the last 24 hours, then they can get in. But we'll see where it goes. Earl, great question. Thank you for the call. Ryan, in Los Osos, California. Hey, Ryan, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I was mainly calling. Okay, I have a Trump. I was talking to a Trump person the other day in the neighborhood. Very heavily Trump. And he was just saying that Trump's, I tell me one thing Trump's done right. He said, judges. He picked the right judges. Mm-hmm. And once I explained to him, things I learned from you, like the Powell memo with the Supreme Federalist Society, giving the names to the federal court, over the Supreme Court, he was shocked. His brain was blown. He's a smart guy, but he's been so deep. And he started walking away and then turned back. And he says, the pandemic will tell. We'll see what happens with the pandemic. That's what's been given into our mind, that we are going to win because what we're doing to the pandemic.
So we need to teach people about the Powell memo. In other words, he was shocked when he found out that these judges are just there to shill for billionaires and corporations.
Yeah, he was shocked. And why aren't we running off of that? Why aren't we exposing that?
Hey, I write about it at least once a week. I rant about it constantly. But I'm with you, Ryan.
I know.
America needs to know. America absolutely needs to know. Ryan, thank you. And good on you for taking on somebody and talking with them. It's so important that we have those conversations, and good on you for educating somebody. Thank you so much for the call, and thanks so much for watching us on Free Speech TV. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in just 1 minute. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes, to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back, 21 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I wanted to get, I'm going to pick up your calls in a couple minutes here, but I just wanted to share with you this, as it were, my daily rant over at HartmannReport.com. And it's titled, Can America Go from Empire to Good Neighbor? And in a way, this kind of, backstops the conversation with Julio, because, France, by mandating vaccines in order to basically participate in French civic life, is being a good neighbor to all the countries around them in slowing down and ultimately, hopefully, stopping the spread of this virus. The more rapidly it spreads, the more frequently it will mutate, and the more frequently those mutations are going to get really, really nasty and able to get around vaccines and things. But, you know, we have had, but this goes way beyond just the vaccine. We in the United States have this long history, and we talked about this somewhat with Greg Palast, was it yesterday or the day before, about the history of Haiti, where, you know, finally they elected a priest, Jean-Baptiste Aristide, who was, you know, a liberation theologist who wanted to run the country for the people rather than for the you know, basically the billionaires, the autocrats, the kleptocrats. And what did we do? We set him up to get overthrown. And I really think that we need to be rethinking our whole concept of foreign aid and our involvement in foreign countries. I mean, the modern era of this started after World War II with the Marshall Plan. And with the Marshall Plan, we did in Germany the exact opposite of what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. In Iraq and Afghanistan, we said, okay, great, we blew up your country, we're going to rebuild it now, but we're going to have American companies come over with American parts and American technology and American contractors, and we're going to rebuild your country, and all the profit is going to come to American defense contractors and construction companies, and companies like Halliburton that was on the verge of bankruptcy when Dick Cheney, the CEO of Halliburton, became vice president. And now, you know, Halliburton is fabulously rich, as is Dick Cheney as a consequence of that. But Harry Truman had said, no, we're going to rebuild Germany with German steel and German cement. We're going to rebuild their infrastructure. We're going to help them rebuild their own infrastructure. And that, to the best of my knowledge, was really the last time that we did this in a way that makes sense. And I mean, there's just, that was in the 40s. In 1951, a guy by the name of Mohammad Mossadegh took over Iran and said, hey, you know, you've got all these foreign oil companies, and particularly American and British oil companies, who are sucking the oil out of our country. It's our oil. We should use it to build roads and schools and hospitals and provide health care for people and provide education for people. And he kicked out the foreign companies. What was our response? The U.S. CIA and British intelligence got together and organized a coup against Mossadegh and installed the Shah. Within 1 year, the Shah had given away 40% of the oil fields in Iran to American companies. A bunch of American companies and a bunch of American families associated with those companies got insanely rich. And, well, we see how it worked out for Iran, right? During the 1960 election, Jack Kennedy was beating up Richard Nixon over his letting Cuba go communist in 1959 when Nixon was vice president. Nixon had a plan to solve that. He was going to have an October invasion in the October of 1960, the month before the election, with him against Kennedy. He was going to have an October invasion of Cuba. He got a whole bunch of Cuban expats together down in Miami, and they were ready to go. They ultimately couldn't make it happen, and that's what Jack Kennedy inherited, the whole Bay of Pigs thing. And Harry Williams, one of the guys who was one of the leaders of the Bay of Pigs, told me about a meeting that he had in the White House with Lyndon Johnson and Bobby Kennedy after Jack's assassination. It was about 3 months after his assassination, where Bobby had this operation, AM World, to assassinate Castro, and he had signed up Juan Almejida, the head of the army, the Cuban army, to go along with us. And so they pitched it to LBJ, and LBJ said, I don't want anything to do with those effing Cubans. You know, he was just sick of it. In fact, he thought that for some time, he thought that Jack Kennedy had been assassinated by Castro. So he says, instead, I'm going to make my stand against communism as far away from the Northern Hemisphere as I can. I'm thinking Vietnam. That'll get the Republican communist hawks off my back. Yeah, that worked out real well. I mean, we just have this whole series, the Chile and Argentina in 73 and 76. We supported both those coups through the CIA, and with Anaconda, IT&T, International Telephone and Telegraph, and Kennecott Corporation. They, according to our State Department, they were involved in these coups. And then you get what came out of that? General Pinochet throwing people out of airplanes. I was in Argentina in 2000 during the hyperinflation that was arguably, one of the side effects of all this. It was years later. I've been in multiple countries, and over and over and over again, what I'm seeing is, American foreign policy and American war policy, Afghanistan and Iraq, huge examples. We destroyed these countries, and now we're leaving. We sucked all this. You know what the GDP of Afghanistan was before we invaded? $2 billion. with a B, not trillion, $2 billion for the entire year.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Average family wealth in Afghanistan when we invaded was $115. We could have given them $2 billion. They would have given us bin Laden, and that would have been the end of it. Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignan-Nondi Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles from their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint.
In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and three-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills-building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. We have a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com about conspiracy theories. Abby Richards came up with a kind of a hierarchy of conspiracies, maybe a variation on the old Maslow hierarchy. And it goes from actual conspiracies to maybe this was a conspiracy, maybe not, we have questions, to this is kind of crazy stuff, but who knows, flying saucers, for example, to actual science denial, conspiracy theories that actually serve to promote the interests of a particular industry or wealthy individuals, to the totally crazy stuff, the flat earth, the reptilian overlords and all that kind of thing, conspiracy theories that can do tremendous damage. And, one of those being one of the conspiracy theories that, brought two Republicans into Congress this year. So anyhow, I lay the whole thing out with a new video for our supporters over at ThomHartmann.com. So, welcome back. Changing foreign policy, dealing with COVID, vaccine passports, all the various things that Congressman Pocan brought. We've got a lot to talk about today. What a time, huh? Irving in Miami. Hey, Irving, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. How are you doing today?
Good. What's up?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the vaccine passports because that tends to be the hot topic nowadays, especially most recently. I know libertarians and others, like Republicans, have a problem with vaccine passports because, in a way, it feels like it limits or obstructs with their civil liberties. I tend to disagree, and I myself am a libertarian, and the reason I say this is because I feel like other countries have the obligation and the right. I feel like other countries have the right to ask people who are entering their country, who are crossing their borders, to show verification or proof that they are vaccinated, because these countries have an obligation to protect their citizenry from diseases, and that's part of a government's function, is to protect its citizens by any means necessary, as long as they respect the international law and of course they respect their own laws as well. But if I myself, for example, am heading to if I myself, a U.S. citizen, am heading to Canada, okay, I will not be upset if Canada asks me for some verification of if I have a vaccine, right, because they have the right to ask me to show proof of am I vaccinated or not, because in a way they have a duty to protect their own citizens.
Yeah, well, and this is nothing new, by the way, Irving. I had to, in order to get into Kenya, as I recall, maybe it was Uganda, but I'm pretty sure it was Kenya, I had to, there's this yellow card. It's an international vaccine status card that you get, from a physician. And I had to get a yellow fever vaccine. I had to have tetanus. I had to have dengue. I think I forget what it was. There were 3 or 4 diseases that I had to be vaccinated for just to get into that country. The airline wouldn't let me on the plane until I could prove that I was vaccinated, because they knew that when we got to the other end, I'd get put on the plane and be sent back home if I wasn't vaccinated. Our schools do this. I think you're absolutely right. And and by the way, what's so weird is that the same people who 40 years ago and 60 years ago were saying, it's the absolute right of an individual store owner to refuse service to anyone, including because they don't like the way they look, like their race. They were defending, that they were defending that. And then the more modern era, they defend store owners' right to have a sign that says no shoes, no service, right? No shirt, no shoes, no service. So why shouldn't store owners be able to say no vaccine, no service? Hey, no shirt, no shoes, no vaccine. You just go someplace else. And why shouldn't countries be able to do that either? I think you framed the argument very well. With the right, the duty to protect. Thank you very much for that. John in West Fork, Arkansas, listening on KPSQ. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Tom. At the end of your segment about Saudi Arabia spying, you mentioned in passing that Merrick Garland had decided not to prosecute Wilbur Ross for lying to Congress.
Yeah.
I just want to give you a heads up. I've come across a couple of sources saying that this story.
I was wrong. It was Bill Barr.
Yeah, okay. I should know if you were aware of that.
Yeah, you must be talking about either a best of show, or because that was a week or so ago that I did that rant. But yeah, I caught that last night.
I wasn't worried. Okay.
Yeah, I caught that last night. And in fact, on Democratic Underground, I think somebody posted it that it wasn't Merrick Garland who made that decision. It was Bill Barr.
Merrick Garland isn't doing some things I don't like, but not in this case.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it turns out now we have learned it's not just Wilbur Ross. It's 5 different cabinet secretaries were referred by their individual inspector generals in their own departments to the Department of Justice for prosecution. And in every single one of those 5 cases, Bill Barr or whoever preceded him as Attorney General said, "Nah, we'll just let the criminals get away with it because they're big friends of Donald Trump." So
good old blind network.
Yeah, there you go. John, thanks for the call, and good on you for working to set things straight. And thanks for the reminder. Brian in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind?
I just wanted to contend what Julio was saying about traveling to Europe. I'm a tourism management professional who is, as we speak, planning a trip for a bunch of people to Europe that may still get canceled because well, you know why? But it's absolutely just mischaracterization when Julio's like, I don't want my I don't want to be restricted when I go to Europe. I just want to be able to travel there, and it's not happening in Europe. It's totally happening in Europe. All over the place, they have vaccine mandates. Now, you can usually get around the mandates, but very often you have to get a test before you go. You have to self-isolate for 5 to 14 days if you don't, if you're coming from different countries. The point is every single country has assessed every other country, and they all have their own set of rules about every other single country. So just the characterization by Julio that, like, no, right now I can just travel to Europe, no problem, and that shouldn't be impeded, it's absolutely untrue. It's absolutely a mischaracterization.
Yeah.
Yes, in many cases he could go without a vaccine, but he would have to pay for his own self-isolation for up to 14 days and his test, and it's just it's
and I'm guessing he's doing that. Julio has I've known Julio for a few years, and he's never just like straight up lied to me. I mean, he'll push crazy positions on the right, but saying that he's not vaccinated, I completely believe him. And I'm guessing that what he's doing is he's doing the required COVID test before he gets on the airplane. And proving and showing the certificate that he's COVID negative to get through customs and things like that. But I think he's going to have a challenge when he tries to go back home to Europe.
But in many cases, that's true. But in many cases, depending on which country you have come from, you still have to isolate once you're there, depending on which country you've come from. Currently, the U.S. is one where you generally only have to prove once your test. But I mean, the point is you can't just freely travel around Europe. Even hotels and restaurants are requiring a test within the last 72 hours often. So, for instance, if you got over there, but then you were there for a week and then you went into a hotel, you probably have to get a new test.
Right.
So it's just, it's yeah.
It seems like it wouldn't be worth the trouble. But, yeah, I agree with everything you're saying, Brian. And thank you for an authoritative voice weighing in on this. I appreciate it. John in Bowie, Maryland. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I just wanted to share with well, I just want to make a comment on Julio. I guess his position, and no one's really talking about this, but there's a medical cost that comes along with COVID, and some of these people who don't want to wear the mask, become vaccinated, if they end up sick, they're going to have to pay a tremendous amount of money, and everyone knows that when it comes to hospitals and hospital bills, that's the number one cost in certain areas for bankruptcy.
John, let me backstop you on this, and then you can finish your rant here. Yesterday, the Journal of the American Medical Association published a new study that found that there are $140 billion in unpaid medical bills in the United States. Roughly 1 in 5 people in the United States has medical debt that has been turned over to a collection agency. It's been sold to a third party. National Nurses United said this is not the sign of a broken system. It's a profiteering healthcare system working just the way the corporate price gougers want it to. Medical debt is highest among people who live in the South, but in states that did not expand Medicaid. That's a dozen states, all controlled by Republicans. And this new national survey conducted by the Commonwealth Fund found that more than a third of insured U.S. adults and half of uninsured U.S. adults had difficulties in the past year paying for medical bills or paying off medical debt. It's mind-boggling, and you're absolutely right. COVID is adding to that.
Yeah, and I think that no one really talks about that. Now, if you really want to stop this whole debate on whether it's vaccinated or not, then you should put a surcharge or a cost on that. Because right now we're dealing with medical welfare. As far as I'm concerned, folks are getting out here thinking they can do whatever they want to do. They get sick, and then we're footing the bill because basically our rates have to go up, or some costs to us will have to go up to pay for what they've done.
Exactly. And I'm just waiting to see how long it's going to be, and I don't think it's going to be very long at all. I'm guessing probably in the next month or so that the big health insurance companies are going to start saying, if you are not vaccinated and you want us to pay for your $100,000 a day stay in the ICU when you get COVID, we're going to consider that a preventable condition, and you can pay your own damn bills. And I'm surprised, frankly, they haven't done it before now, John. And when that happens, maybe that'll be an incentive for people. I don't know. It requires some thinking ahead. John, thank you. Your points are very, very well made, and I appreciate the call. And thank you for listening to us on Sirius XM. It's 45 minutes past the hour. More of your calls and my rants on the other side of this break. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're just getting started here. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, speaking the truths to multinational corporations we'd really rather you didn't know all about. And welcome back. This is we're back on the air, right? Yeah. Yes, thank you. Okay. For just a moment there, I was. Anyway, I have this amazing crazy alert. Well, actually, I'll share that crazy alert with you on the other side of this break. Let's pick up some phone calls here. Jeffrey in Des Moines, Iowa. Hey, Jeffrey, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech.
Yeah, thank you. It just strikes me oftentimes in corporate media how you'll hear that protests in Cuba are in opposition to socialism, and then 2 minutes later you'll hear about far more violent protests where more people are dead in South Africa, and you don't ever hear that they're protests against capitalism. And it's just, I guess I'd say two things about that. I mean, if you're going to assign protests to an economic system, be consistent. So if you say Peru or Colombia, then I suppose you better say it's against capitalism. But the other dynamic is, I mean, I'm a teacher, and all countries have mixed economies. There really aren't barely any capitalist countries or socialist countries in the world. All countries have mixed economies. The irony being that in Cuba, a lot of the sanctions on remittances and cruise ships not coming in are really hurting an emerging private sector. Yep. As you know, we know that the private sector needs money to recycle. And as Cuba tries to develop sort of a model, like a state capitalism, maybe Vietnam or Chinese style, it's really the private sector that's suffering a lot from some of these initiatives.
And they had when Louise and I were there, it was the last year, I think, of the Obama administration, in March of that year, the on this tour with Code Pink, group. The restaurants that we went to all over Cuba, or all over Havana anyway, and a couple about outside of Havana, they had legalized basically small enterprise. You could have your own restaurant, and you could have up to 50 tables, or maybe it was that you could seat up to 50 people. I remember the 50. It was one or the other. And we visited all these small restaurants that were little family enterprises, and they weren't state-run at all. They weren't state-owned or anything. Right. So they were actually far more liberal in that regard than Vietnam or China.
A few months ago, before COVID, there was a meeting here at Drake University where some Cuban officials were here talking about their changes in agriculture, and it was actually kind of funny because the Cuban officials were speaking, hey, Monsanto and others, they can come in, but we will regulate their behavior. It was actually kind of funny because the professors and other people at Drake were literally pushing back on them, saying, are you sure you want so much of this? Right. I didn't ever think I would see that dynamic, but it was an interesting one. But thank you for your time and all your good work.
Yeah, no, Jeffrey, you are so spot on this. And also when we were in Cuba, one of the other things that we saw were small farms, that some of the larger factory farm, or it's not the right word, but the old Soviet style, 1,000 acres being farmed by a bunch of people who are, but it's owned by the state. They were starting to break those up and giving the land to individual peasant families who then became farmers, and it was an entree into the middle class. So anyhow, Jeffrey, thank you for the call. That was very thoughtful, very insightful, and I appreciate it. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Stay right here. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. There's so much news coming out of the Trump administration, so much corruption, so many crimes. Now they're letting people kill endangered species. Now they're selling off, the Arctic National Wildlife Preserve refuge to big oil companies. Now they're they're authorizing pesticides that we know cause birth defects and damage to children. It's just, step after step after step that it's so easy to forget that back in July of 2020, it was reported that Jared Kushner and Mike Pence's nephew, John Pence, created a couple of LLCs, American-Made Media Consultants Corporation, that took $617 million of Trump campaign cash, and nobody knows where it went. I'm telling you, these guys are professional grifters. We need to keep an eye on it. There's a whole rant about it over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. So our crazy alert for the day, social media is scratching their heads. This is from the Irish Times over in Ireland. The headline, they can't not have noticed. Why does Jeff Bezos' rocket look like that? And then, which also raises the question, why does the Amazon logo look like that? What is it about Jeff Bezos and these, Well, they call it anthropomorphic, which is, taking something that's not human and giving it human qualities, in this case, the rocket. And you know what I'm talking about. I need not say it, but the world is noticing, Jeff, and it's seeming very strange. Anyhow, picking up your phone calls here. Antonio, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Hey, Antonio, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you so much. I'm 28 years old. I'm in North Carolina. Actually, I want to provide a little bit of pushback against something that you said that involves both climate change and environmental racism. A couple of weeks ago,
I said when?
One of your callers.
A couple of weeks ago. Okay, keep going.
One of your callers was talking about the danger that sea level rise poses to coastal infrastructure. First, I want to say it's not climate doomism to recognize that some of the projections from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration are, in fact, catastrophic.
I agree. I agree. We are in the midst of an extinction. We are in the midst of a crisis. It's getting worse every day. The world is not doing anything close to what they need to do about it. This leaked IPCC report is absolutely almost on the edge of panic. I'm very concerned about it. A lot of people I know are very concerned about it. I know I had a woman call in a couple of weeks ago who was, who had essentially told Joyce that she was suicidal and just started, crying on the air. And I was trying to calm her down, and I probably went way too far in trying to just keep her from going off the edge. But that one call notwithstanding, I am absolutely with you, Antonio. We need to do something about this. We need to do something now. This is a crisis. Thank you very much for the call. Marcus in Chicago. Hey, Marcus, what's on your mind?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. I'm going to cut right to the chase, and it's going to upset some people, especially those on the right, especially maybe some white people, about this vaccine passport. These same people that want to go to other countries and do as they please, those same people will stand up against people from other countries that will come here and not have a vaccine passport. The same people that don't want to wear a mask or prove that they've been vaccinated before they go into a restaurant or whatever place of business. Those are the same people that listen to Fox News, so-called news is what I call them, QAnon and all of that.
Yeah.
These are white people. And it's been this way through history. If it's not white, it's not right. It's my way or the highway. They talk about their civil liberties. Well, you're treading on my civil liberties if you want me to wear a mask or to get a vaccine. Well, what about my civil liberties? Mm-hmm. For me not wanting to get sick from whatever you may have.
And I would add, I think it's the same thing with the gun argument. What about my right not to get shot?
Yeah, it's a big one too. But it just blows my mind.
Right.
That you care more about you than you do humanity.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's particularly bizarre when you learn that Fox News has their own internal vaccine passport. They call it the Fox Clear Pass. That the Fox employees all go along with. Everybody there is vaccinated.
Yes, when Fox News, when this pandemic first hit the fan, and they were advising us, well, you don't have to get the vaccine or you don't have to wear a mask, just go out, go to work and do that. All of those people were working remotely from home.
Yep.
Every one of them.
Yep. And when they got back in the studio, it was because they were all vaccinated. I mean, it's exactly. And then when this reporter, I think it was Carol Leonig, but I could be wrong, asked Tucker Carlson, have you been vaccinated? And he was like, well, that's a terrible personal question. When was the last time you had sexual intercourse? It's like, really? I mean, this is your argument? It's a personal question? It's a public health question.
People that follow them and listen to them, they all fell for I'll call it the con.
Yeah.
You know, you people can't see that you're being lied to.
Yeah.
And then once they find out that this has been going on at Fox, this is what I see now. Oh, well, they never said don't wear the mask and not get the vaccine.
Yeah, right.
You know.
Yeah, and now the crazy followers are moving to the next right-wing network. It's a bizarre. Marcus, thank you for the call. So well said.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignondi Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, This wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty 2 stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and 3-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So why is it that in other countries around the world, other developed countries in particular, there is, lightning fast internet at, in many cases, half the cost of what we are paying for generally crummy internet across the United States? There's got to be a reason, right? Why is that? Well, Yosef Getachew is the Media and Democracy Program Director at Common Cause, commoncause.org. YGETACHEW 2 or at Common Cause are the 2 Twitter handles. And Yosef, welcome back to the program. It's been quite a while. Tell me about why it is that we can't have nice things in the United States when it comes to broadband.
Well, thanks for having me, Tom. I think you accurately summed it up in your initial comments. Much of the country here has connectivity through the largest ISPs. That means Comcast, AT&T, and Verizon. But at the same time, much of the country doesn't have strong connectivity because of these companies. The truth is that these companies are really trying to maintain their market power when it comes to providing connectivity. Most Americans only have one meaningful choice for connectivity. At the same time, prices are continuing to go up in astronomical ways. For the most part, most households aren't able to adopt broadband because affordability is the biggest barrier. So what we're seeing here is you have the largest ISPs who are providing connectivity, but at the same time failing to provide connectivity in areas that are not profitable for them, raising prices, providing substandard services, or just failing to invest in low-income areas and redlining neighborhoods where they don't feel like providing quality networks to. And they're getting away with all of this because they are lobbying Congress and policymakers in a number of ways to make sure that their market power is upheld. So over the years, we've had Congress try and pass reforms, not just to close the digital divide, but to actually hold providers accountable for providing high-speed networks, affordable networks, and quality networks.
Yeah, if I'm...
The challenge is that...
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No. I thought you were finished. Finish your thought. My apologies.
Yeah, the challenge here is that we've had ISPs spending millions of dollars lobbying these efforts and making sure that they don't actually see the light of day.
Yeah, looking at this new report that you guys published over at Common Cause, Yosef, the 15 biggest, most influential internet service providers spent more than $234 million on lobbying and federal elections during the 116th Congress, an average of more than $320,000 a day. This is why in France, for example, you can get a gigabyte speed internet and, bundled with a cell phone for $50 a month. And here in the United States, you can get really crappy internet service for $70, $80 a month. These guys are just cleaning up. Doesn't this, what you're describing of kind of these deserts, internet deserts, places where the broadband is just, so dysfunctional, and particularly rural areas where they refuse to go. This is exactly what Franklin Roosevelt faced with the electric companies that didn't want to take electricity out to rural areas or deal with unprofitable low-income communities. It's exactly what Dwight Eisenhower confronted with telephone companies that didn't, or Ma Bell back in the day, that didn't want to pay to take telephone service into rural areas. And so FDR created the Rural Electrification Administration, the REA. We paid for that with federal money. Eisenhower, I believe it was Eisenhower, it could have been Truman, created the Rural Telephony Administration, the RTA, to do the same thing. Is it time for us to say enough? We're going to do as a nation like Chattanooga did. The whole city just said, okay, that's it. We're going to provide city. The city is going to provide broadband, and everybody in Chattanooga has access to really high quality, really fast, lickety-split internet service at a very low cost, and they don't have a company like Verizon or Comcast literally spying on every interaction, which creates the need for VPNs and things, so that you don't get spied on by your internet service provider.
Yeah, so I think the important point to note here is that we've actually spent billions of dollars over the years trying to get connectivity out to the entire country. But the problem is those dollars haven't always been tied to accountability metrics, safeguards, and quality of service standards that we all need. You mentioned the Rural Electrification Act earlier. These are national missions that you're talking about that we haven't had in quite a while. We've always thrown money at this problem, but not in a way that's actually upended the market power that ISPs have and given folks competition, meaningful choices, safeguards when it comes to quality of service, safeguards when it comes to speed and affordability. And these are the things that we've been trying to get Congress to do. As you probably know and your listeners know, there's an infrastructure bill getting discussed in Congress right now, and broadband infrastructure is a critical part of those discussions. We at Common Cause have endorsed the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act that was introduced by Whip Clyburn in the House and Senator Klobuchar in the Senate. And the idea behind this bill is not just to throw billions of dollars into deployment of networks, which it does, but to also include a lot of safeguards that we've been talking about. That means price transparency. So we actually know how much the service of a service, the price of a service costs. That means competition. So you have multiple providers in a service area, not just one provider. that means municipal networks. So if a company is refusing to invest in an area, you have the community on its own saying, okay, let's just do it, and let's make sure we have the funding to do it and build out quality, affordable networks to our communities because no one else is doing it. And these are the kind of protections that we need that we haven't gotten in quite a while, and we have to tie the funding to those protections. Yeah. Not to mention actually getting strong authorities for our federal agencies over these networks.
It seems to me like one of the core issues that we need to address is, for lack of a better way, I'm sure that there's some technical term for it, you probably know, but basically the pipes, as it were. I mean, back in the day when it was dial-up and the internet was, you know, AOL and CompuServe, the phone company did not have, and to this day does not have, the ability to listen in on your phone conversation and adjust your bill based on what you're doing, or block, you know, who you may call. They can't do those things. This is the whole common carrier notion. And I remember when we were in Vermont, this was, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a local internet service provider. It was called SovereignNet. Vermont used to, you know, there's this movement to make it a sovereign nation, thus the name. And, you know, Verizon was offering internet through your cable TV service, but you could get SovereignNet, and they also came through your cable TV service. But they, you know, Verizon had to rent space on their pipe to the local network, and it was like $25 a month for really high quality broadband. Eventually, they got Vermont to change the law so that whoever owns the wire going into your house can block you from having other people provide internet through that wire. That is not the case in France. In France and most of Europe. In most of Europe, whoever owns the wire coming into your house, if you want a different internet service provider to provide you with internet through that same piece of wire, they have to pay a small fee to that company for the maintenance of the wire, you know, of the pipe, of the whatever it may be. But they can't lock people out. Like here in the United States, I mean, the only internet service I can get, for example, is Comcast. But, you know, there's dozens of companies that would be glad to provide me with service over Comcast's lines if Comcast would allow it. But we have changed the law so Comcast can block them. Why don't we change that? Why isn't that like right at the top of the list? Because that creates competition.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think it comes down to one thing, oversight and accountability. Right now, the Federal Communications Commission is the expert agency over communications networks. But what ended up happening over the last 4 years is that that agency completely abdicated its authority to oversee broadband networks. So when it comes to issues like privacy or net neutrality or other type of common carrier regulations, it comes down to that agency enacting or utilizing its authority. But what it said was, nope, we're not going to do anything. So it created this wild west where the biggest broadband providers can basically do whatever they want without any type of accountability when it comes to the actual service of the network or when it comes to competition and things like that. There's no accountability there. And so if we have an agency in place that actually says, hey, Comcast or hey, Verizon or whoever, you have to actually offer parts of your network to competitors so they can build out so there's meaningful competition, that's what the agency is there for. Right. We actually had broadband privacy rules back in the Obama era FCC. Those rules unfortunately got thrown out by Congress, and now there are no privacy rules when it comes to ISPs or let alone any other part of the digital ecosystem, and that's a conversation for another day. But again, it comes back to what authorities are we utilizing or not utilizing. Our report actually specifically says, hey, FCC, you need to restore your authority over broadband to make sure that ISPs are not engaging in discriminatory and unjust practices like the ones we've been discussing.
Well, and right now, you know, Comcast can read every email I send. They can look at every website that I click on. They can sell that information to anybody who wants to target me specifically. And there's no rules or laws or anything preventing them from doing that, which I think is nuts. So we're talking with Yosef Getachew of CommonCause.org. Yosef, we're just about out of time here. What can average people do to try to move this along? And what's the status of the FCC? Has Biden yet appointed a new FCC commissioner?
So we are waiting for the White House to appoint a fifth commissioner and designate one of the commissioners as the permanent chair of the agency. Right now, the agency is deadlocked at 2 democratically appointed commissioners and 2 Republican appointed commissioners. And with that deadlock, it can't move forward on issues like net neutrality or universal broadband in regards to some of the issues we've been talking about. And so we're waiting for that to happen. It could happen any time now. And once that deadlock is broken, we're hopeful that the agency can move forward on making sure broadband is universal and affordable for everyone.
That's great. Because it's like, this is such a mess, what's going on here. And it's going on all over the country. Yosef, it's great talking with you. Thank you so much for dropping by.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Yosef Getachew, the website commoncause.org. And, they're doing God's work, as the old saying goes. In fact, their report says our political system is rigged in favor of hedge funds and wealthy shareholders. Telecom companies are limiting deployment. And on it goes from there.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So we'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this short break. Stay with us. And welcome back. Bud in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Bud, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to let everyone know we just actually got back from Spain and France last evening.
Whoa.
And they're really restricted. In order to get into Spain, you have to go on the website and fill out, you get a QR code. You have to register actually to go there. And then you need a COVID test and vaccination. Mm-hmm. In France, we went to a Winston Marsalis jazz concert in a park, and we're required to have not only our passport, but a vaccination card. Wow. And then on Sunday, we went to the Tour de France to see the final. They blocked the entire Champs-Élysées off. And in order to get to the finish line, you had to show the same thing, either a negative COVID test or a vaccination card. And then, of course, to fly home, we needed a negative COVID test to enter the United States. So it's serious over there. They're not messing around, and masks are required almost everywhere.
Yeah, and that's just rational. I mean, this is how
it should be. Yeah,
this is a public health emergency. We've got officially around 4 million dead people around the world. The real numbers are probably at least twice that. We've got officially over 600,000 people died of COVID in the United States. The numbers are probably at least 20 or 30% greater than that. And this goes beyond Nero fiddling while Rome burns. I mean, Fox News and the right wingers are engaging in a very dangerous, a very deadly game, frankly, and it concerns me tremendously.
Yeah, it's serious. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Bud. Bud, quick question. When you were interacting with the locals in Spain and France, was there a lot of this? They're interfering with my freedom. I don't like the. Was that going on? Or how were average people responding to it?
No, there were people who weren't wearing masks. I did see that, but there was no uproar over. No one got angry. No one got upset. I mean, it's just the way things are. You wear a mask and you show your vaccination card, and everyone seems to accept it.
Was there,
which is how it should be
on the plane back and in the airports and things? Did you see anybody who was protesting?
No. And the flight attendants, we were on American Airlines. The flight attendants, my wife actually took it off to eat her meal and then just forgot to put it back on, and she told her, right, put your mask on. So even the flight attendants took it serious. So
which is a good thing. I mean, this is what we want. And you were vaccinated before you left, I'm assuming?
We were vaccinated. Yeah, you had to. It's 72 hours before your departure time. And then to get back, same thing, 72 hours before your departure time.
You have to have had a vaccine within 72 hours, or you have to have a negative COVID test?
No. I'm sorry, negative COVID test. So we actually had 2 tests. We didn't need a COVID test to go from Spain to France, surprisingly. We just showed our vaccination card. But they checked. I mean, they looked at everything. And we did it in an outdoor park. And he still stopped people. And there were people who didn't have it, and they sent them away, even though they had tickets. So
wow. And so even though you were vaccinated and you could demonstrate that, you still had to have a negative COVID test to get on the plane?
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. They won't let you even enter. They won't let you on the plane without it. So.
That's fascinating. Bud, thanks a lot for sharing the story with us. I appreciate it. Good talking to you. And thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV there in Arizona. We'll be back with your calls on any of the many topics we have talked about today. Plus, I've got to tell you about which state no longer wants their children taught that the Klan was a bad group. Seriously. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Of course, at HartmannReport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at HartmannReport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at ThomHartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at HartmannReport.com and ThomHartmann.com. So, what state in their right mind would pass a law saying that we no longer want our children taught that the Ku Klux Klan was morally wrong? Think about it for a second. It probably won't take you more than a second to come up with the answer, but also the same state has just said that they want to drop from their curriculum requirements. This is the state legislature. This actually passed their Senate this week. In fact, it's called Senate Bill 3. It passed 18-4 in Texas. A bill to eliminate the requirement that public schools teach that the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacy are morally wrong. Can't teach that anymore. And to eliminate Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, the works of United Farm Worker leader Cesar Chavez, and Susan B. Anthony's writings about the women's suffrage movement and Native American history. All these things being removed from Texas school books by law, by mandate of the Texas legislature. Now, I don't think it's passed the House yet. I believe it's just passed the Senate. There is an already restrictive Texas education law that was passed last month in the House in Texas, HB 3979, that bans critical race theory. The Senate bill doesn't specifically ban critical race theory by name, but excludes so many of these things. And you may no longer teach that the Klan was morally wrong. Seriously? If you didn't realize before now that the Republican Party, these are all Republicans in Texas who are pushing this, that the Republican Party's brand has become, we've known for a long time that the GOP's brand was, we're in with the big corporations and we're in with the billionaires. That's been the case since 1920 with the Warren Harding. Teddy Roosevelt was the last, William Howard Taft, the last Republican president who actually was willing to take on rich people. But ever since Harding in 1920, the GOP has been just totally in the bag with big money. Period, full stop. But now we're seeing that it's not just big money. It's white big money. It's not just big corporations, but it's big corporations that are willing to support politicians who are willing to support racism. That the brand, we knew about Richard Nixon. We knew, with the Southern strategy, and we knew about Ronald Reagan giving his first speech in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where where Schwimmer and Goodman and Cheney were murdered, the civil rights workers. And we knew about the Willie Horton ad with George Herbert Walker Bush. And we knew about Donald Trump talking about Mexican rapists. But we all thought that those were just like little things that existed in isolation. No, they're not. They're not in isolation. This is one giant piece. And that one giant piece is that the official party of white supremacy now is the Republican Party. Period. Full stop. Indisputably. And they're trying to carve it into law in Texas.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right after this break. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
Book today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on the birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development, and why women have better sex under socialism.
Hartmann Program. We try to have a lot of content over at ThomHartmann.com, and of course every day my daily rant goes up at HartmannReport.com. No advertising, no fee or anything like that. You can even get it pushed out to your email box for free. But we also have, podcasts available that are free through wherever your favorite podcast provider may be, or the full 3-hour program. It's a 1-hour podcast, the one that's free out there. There's also the 3-hour podcast available at ThomHartmann.com. And we have a special video this week for supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. It's over at ThomHartmann.com about the 62 worst members of the U.S. House of Representatives and Josh Hawley in the Senate. These are the people who voted against the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed the Senate and the House overwhelmingly. But these 62 members of the House did what is just awful. You can check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Picking up your phone calls. And I did want to just flag a couple of things. Just keep you up to date with what's going on in the news. You probably caught that yesterday, Dr. Fauci called Rand Paul a liar to his face, which was really sweet. He said, Senator Paul, I have never lied before. First, Paul accused him of lying. He said, I have never lied before Congress, and I do not retract my previous statement. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, and quite frankly. And I want to say that officially, you do not know what you are talking about. And then Paul started pushing another lie, and Fauci replies, I resent that lie that you are now propagating. I totally resent that, and if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you. So, God bless Anthony Fauci, number one. And another reason why, the rights and the Republicans are all hysterical and going after him. The second, and I think this is fascinating, we're trying to book, in fact, I think maybe we have booked Carol Leonig and Phil Rucker for the show next week about their new book, I Alone Can Fix It, which we just got a copy of today. But in this book, they point out that there is a discrepancy between the official timeline of events on January 6th that was put out by the Pentagon, by Trump's Pentagon. Keep in mind, Trump fired a bunch of Pentagon people right after he lost the election and replaced them with toadies. So there was an acting Secretary of Defense and an acting Secretary of the Army and all these positions were acting. And the book exposes these discrepancies. You know, this is pretty amazing. The book says, quote, despite Milley recommending that the Pentagon call up neighboring National Guard units immediately, Ryan McCarthy, this is the guy that Trump had put in, Ryan McCarthy hadn't got around to it until more than 2.5 hours after the Capitol was breached. McCarthy was serving as the acting Secretary of the Army at the time. And the Department of Defense also omitted from their timeline a 4:39 p.m. call between acting Secretary of Defense Chris Miller. He was the guy who wrote the memo saying, you may not, to the National Guard, you may not provide all these different types of assistance to the Capitol Police. And White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, along with Mitch McConnell. That doesn't appear in the Pentagon timeline. And this raises some really significant questions that, what's the old saying, inquiring minds want to know. What the heck is going on with this? So, all that said, let's pick up your phone calls. Paul in Spooner, Wisconsin. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, here's the deal. I am on the county board in my county up here in northern Wisconsin, and there was some stimulus money that had gone to our county recently to go into broadband, expand broadband into our rural county. Well, what happens is, according to get this money, it's $3.5 million. There has to be a three-way partnership. It has to be between the government agency, as well as a private partner, which would be the local company that provides internet service, which there's several within our county. So, without any warning, it was on the agenda about a week ago in our county board meeting. We learned about the program. We learned that this company, Mosaic, out of Rice Lake, Wisconsin, wants to expand their fiber optics line into our county, and it would cover about 2 townships and would cover roughly 1,000 homes, 1,000 properties. I'm not even going to say homes because they're not resort industry and vacation properties up here.
Paul, you're fading in and out. I don't know if you can do anything about that. But
Okay. The total dollars is $3.5 million. What they've done is they've asked us to put this towards this project, and it's going to affect roughly 1,000 homes.
Right.
Now, the only one that's going to get a profit out of this is the local internet company, because they're going to be able to get new customers. Not necessarily everybody's going to hook into it, though.
Right.
But if you figure out what we're spending here, we're spending roughly $35,000 per home for that company to come in and put fiber optics for roughly 1,000 people.
That's incredible.
They're never going to get there. It's amazing.
I mean, we lived in rural Vermont, way out in the woods for about 5 years, and to get electric power back to our house, or back to a house like ours, was about $10,000 a mile. I'm just blown away that it would be $34,000 to bring broadband to a house.
Right. The other thing is we have other companies within the county, and I said, why don't we put our money to where we get more bang for the buck for more population? Some of these cities that we have, we can get them. And the response was the carrier in those cities doesn't want to participate in the plan. So in other words, we're at the mercy with this free money. Basically, it's free money given to you to say, here's $3.5 million, spend it on fiber optics.
Because somebody is so in love with public-private partnerships as opposed to just letting a municipality or a county just do its own thing like Chattanooga did.
That's my statement. And I said, why don't we just look into this and put the money towards that? And I was told that our legislature in Wisconsin has passed laws to prohibit that from happening.
Oh, God. I'm not surprised. You've got Republicans who control both the House and Senate in Wisconsin, so it makes perfect sense. That's amazing.
It was so sad to have to vote on that, because I knew it was such a waste. It's a huge amount, and we didn't think this through. And it's the stimulus money that came to us, and we have to do something with it, or you lose it.
Yeah, and this is out of the stimulus bill from June. You're talking the big, the American Rescue Act, I think it's called. Yeah.
Yes, it has to go into broadband or sewer systems and that kind of stuff. And we don't, because we're a county, we don't have a sewer system.
Yeah.
It's all septic.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing the story with us, Paul. It's grim, but it just kind of adds to the argument, and you know, hopefully the Trump administration, excuse me, the Biden administration. Hopefully the Biden administration will quickly get you know, another Democrat on the FCC and appoint somebody as chair and revisit some of these like the net neutrality rules and things like that, because we really need to fix this. Paul, thank you again. It's great to hear from you. Erica in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, Erica. What's up on your end? What's on your mind?
As a history major, I was just sick to hear your segment that the Texas legislature is going to sanitize, I guess, white supremacy,
the Klan,
KKK,
specifically.
Yeah, that they're going to, you know, do away with teaching about the farm workers and women's suffrage. I wasn't sure if you're aware how much Texas influences the school books that are written for the entire nation because they buy such volume.
They are the only state that really tightly, on an entire statewide basis, regulates school books like that, and therefore they define the standards for school books all across the country.
Yep. A few years ago, when they decided that Thomas Jefferson was a big old lefty, they reworked and much reduced his footprint in the Texas history books, and I'm sure that will be afoot now too. So that this will impact our children in every jurisdiction.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Erica, and that's something that I missed in that story. This goes beyond the Texas School Board, or the statewide school board, or whatever they call that group that oversees the books, because this is the actual legislature saying, you know, we're actually going to pass laws like this. It's crazy. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Erica. That was an important one, and I appreciate that. By the way, by way of also making corrections, earlier I had quoted a quote to Julio when we were debating about vaccines and passports and things. I had quoted France's President Emmanuel Macron as saying that now you guys get to stay home. Sue let me know that quote, which has been all over the internet, is apparently a fake quote. So just so you know, if you're gonna repeat it or somebody like that, you know, it's apparently not real. Diane in Little Rock, Arkansas. Hey, Diane, what's on your mind?
Okay, let me explain something about the schools in suburban Little Rock, where I've been substituting for the last 7 years. Mm-hmm. Number one, and this is a middle class, mostly white districts. Number one, most of the teachers have master's degrees. Number two, because of the use of Chromebooks, textbooks are not ordered as much or rarely used. That's number two. Number three, in 7 years, I have never seen a legislature sit in on a classroom. Yeah. Never. Yeah. Very rarely, maybe one time, have I seen a principal in a classroom. Pretty much, the teachers are highly educated, highly open-minded, and that's what they're teaching. I've never seen a parent in the classroom. The teachers are pretty much on their own when teaching. So it doesn't matter what they pass because they have no idea what the teachers are teaching. And I always say to myself, the students are very open-minded and they are getting a liberal education in spite of what people think. Yeah. So
but here's the problem.
Don't be worried about it.
Here's the problem, and this is actually happening. I mean, my personal experience was, you know, when I've told the story before, when one of my kids was 7 years old and we had just moved to Atlanta, and I said, you know, he came home from school and I said, what did you learn in school today? And he was like, we learned about the War of Northern Aggression. And, you know, had I been like, you know, super flipped out or an activist, I would have been calling the school going, the what? But, you know, what happens when these kids come home from school and start talking about Martin Luther King or Susan B. Anthony and their parents know that that's banned, those teachers are going to, I mean, hell is going to rain down on them.
Excuse me, but parents don't care. If they were to put, they'd never put cameras in the classroom. Yeah. You know why? Because most of the students do not want an education. It's a total uproar. Yeah. I tell you one thing, I was pleasantly surprised. I put a DVD in a history class, and I thought, wow, this is very graphic on slavery. And I looked, and I go, who made this? History Channel. So that's what the teachers are presenting to the students. Parents don't show up parents' night. Most parents are too busy working, trying to make a living, and just do not.
I get it. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
But just wait until it shows up on Tucker Carlson's show. And it will. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Rick in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Rick, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Yeah, very interesting show, and it's partly to my one point. And my point is, my big concern is that having people do masks again, even though it's good, and the fact that we have so many people will not get their vaccine shot, I do believe we are on a fence about to fall into a very, very dark water. I say, as somewhat of a history buff, we are very similar in many ways to the Civil War. Because I say the Civil War is about state rights. Slavery was the catalyst that brought to war. And our demise, and I'm sorry if I sound like I'm an optimist, our demise will come because of this COVID. If we do not get this together, these little 30%, you say, well, that's not much. I say that it's going to be a major contributor if you have people close up and wear masks again, even though that's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. So that's my rant.
Yeah. No, I think you're right, Rick. My guess is that the way this is going to play out, and as I've been saying for months now, this is exactly what the Republican Party wants. It's why they are pushing these lies and this misinformation. Is what will happen is you'll start to see red counties melting down. We're seeing this in Missouri right now, and we're seeing it in Florida, although there's not a lot of reporting. You're going to see red counties melting down, hospital officials freaking out. The result of that will be that people stop going to restaurants, stop going shopping, just kind of go back into withdrawal for a while. The result of that will be a slowing down of the economy. The result of that will be a drop in the stock market. The result of that will be that, the economy softens, and in the 2022 election, guess what? The Republicans are going to be coming and saying, those Democrats, they brought you a terrible economy. See, vote for Republicans. And I think this is an electoral strategy, Rick. Death as a strategy.
Unfortunately, we were quite right. Even though I also watching this meeting about the commission thing that's kind of not going very well, and the lies they tell and the bizarreness. You think, am I watching a cartoon?
Oh, you're talking about Jim Jordan and Jim Banks not getting put on the night.
Yeah, and it's like they're like little kids have a temper tantrum. I can't get my way, so I'm going to be mad, and I'm going to make all kinds of accusations because I can't be wrong because I'm important.
I saw that they were on TV. I couldn't hear what they had to say. It was happening while I was on the air. Did you catch any comments from them? I mean,
they're claiming that Nancy Pelosi just doing this because she has an anger problem and anger management and
Jim Jordan? Gymnasium Jordan is saying that?
Well, just different people are saying this, and one is backing the other one up, and they're claiming such thing as, well, how come Nancy Pelosi, how come she didn't see there was more police there, and then they had proper training there on the 6th? I mean, she's just so incompetent, and all they care about is themselves and promoting the Democratic Party, and they don't care about the people, which, of course, is not
that was
right
their shtick. Yeah, amazing. Well, Rick, it's, Jim Jordan and Jim Banks are grandstanders. They're P.T. Barnums of the first order. They are appropriate heirs of the Trump clown. And, Rick, thank you for the call, and thanks for the comments that you made. And we have to live with it, I suppose, to a certain point. But one hopes that in their home districts, the Democrats are getting organized and are going to turn people out. But as long as they keep running on white supremacy in largely white districts, they will continue to win, at least for the time being, which is a really sad state of affairs. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at ThomHartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at HartmannReport.com. And, of course, over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program of ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Maggie in Cold Springs, Minnesota. Hey, Maggie, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I really appreciate your show. And for weeks I've been wanting to call and share what Erica shared so eloquently about.
Maggie, you're fading in and out. I'm not. Can you make sure your mouth is right next to the microphone?
Sure. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to thank Erica for explaining so clearly that what goes in Texas is what goes for U.S. textbooks. Is what the publishers do. And also, when you're talking about, these look like pieces of a bigger plan, and they really are. And I know that you've read and you share on the show at times, like Dark Money by Jane Mayer. But I don't know if you've read, and I hope you have, Democracy in Chains.
Oh, yeah. We've had Nancy on the program.
Oh, awesome. Sorry I missed that.
It was a couple of years ago when the book came out. But, yeah, and it's a great book. And she does a deep dive into, what's the guy's name?
The Economist. Yeah. I forget, too.
Yeah, in any case.
Yeah, and it's really chilling what they did at Pinochet's request in Chile. Mm-hmm. And to this day, to this year, Chileans are marching in the streets and they can't change what has been made, the changes in the Constitution and such. And really, that's what will happen if they again get all three, both houses of Congress and the presidency.
Oh, yeah. It'll be the end, perhaps temporarily, but it'll be the end of American democracy. And by the way, James McGill Buchanan was the guy that Nancy wrote about in Democracy in Chains. But yeah, spot on.
And I really consider that a prequel to Dark Money, even though it was written after. But I have to say this: everything that's going on in our country to the ill is the Koch billionaire network. And I have to say, Charles Koch is a very skilled long-term strategist.
Yes,
and he and right-wing wealthy men have been working this plan. Well, certainly they started as soon as FDR was able to get through legislation.
And it went on steroids with the Powell memo. Maggie, thank you. You said it so well. I want to try and get one more caller in here in the last minute that I have. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind?
Hey, well, on the Texas textbooks, A, most schools can't just dump all their books and get brand new ones. So, B, that means loyal teams of Republicans are going to have to race in and black out all that nasty stuff that they're not allowed to have. And that means redacted books. Children are going to see all this black area and go, what am I not allowed to see? It's sort of like Playboy, and what's missing here? So I don't think that's going to go very well. So.
Well,
redacted material didn't work for the Mueller report either. Yeah. People want to know.
I think I agree with you. I think that there is a long-term strategy here. I don't think that they're going to be sending people into schools with felt pens It was Sharpies, but I love the metaphor, the image in my mind. It's a great one. Sandra, thank you. That was brilliant. And thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And a special thanks, by the way. I've been made aware recently that both some of our nonprofit stations with their fundraisers and some of our for-profit stations with their advertisers, that people have been reaching out to say, hey, I support the Thom Hartmann program. Thank you for advertising on it, or thank you for carrying it. And I want to thank you so much for doing that. It really means a lot to us. So and get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say, fight back!